Good morning, everybody. Welcome to OP Radio, broadcasting live from the internet. We've got a very special episode for you today with a very interesting guest. I'm really looking forward to talking to him. Before I allow him to introduce himself, though, I want to allow a new colleague, it's her first time on OP Radio, to say hello and introduce herself.
Hey everyone, this is Vivian here. I am dialing in from beautiful Greece. I am on the OP Labs team and I hang out with all of our fun wallet partners. So super excited to have Michael and Tally Ho here. They're actually the first, I believe you guys are actually the first wallet to be on OP Radio. So this is going to be fun. Thanks, Mac, for putting this together and excited for the next hour.
Thank you, Vivian. That was great. And so without further ado, Michael, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself. Go ahead, sir.
Awesome. Thanks, Mac. Thanks for having me here. And Vivian, it's great to see you on here too. And it's exciting that this is the first time on OP Radio. Folks are hearing you. It's been awesome working with you guys both. And yeah, excited for more of it. So yeah, intro to myself. So I've been I guess like a builder and entrepreneur in the Bitcoin, crypto, Ethereum, Web3, freedom tech, whatever you want to call it, space for a while. I first started going to Bitcoin meetups back in 2014, back in New York and Brooklyn, where I'm based. And then in 2015, became a product manager at one of the earliest US-based SaaS firms in crypto, basically selling like white label exchange software to some of the largest exchanges at the time, like Bitfinex or BTC China. After that, I was the director of product at a company called Casa. We built in 2018 like a physical Raspberry Pi, like janky but kind of adorable, like Bitcoin Lightning full node. And we created what I think is kind of like what's easily the best kind of super secure, wallet for people securing a large amount of Bitcoin. So a lot of our clients would have maybe a couple $1,000,000 and up worth of Bitcoin. That's pretty common knowledge. And it was just a really interesting product to work on. We had our CTO is someone named Jameson Lopp, who's kind of like the most hardcore sort of gun-toting libertarian Bitcoiner you can imagine. And our design chief was the former design lead at Tinder. So we were really working on like, how can we make a hardcore kind of crypto native product really lovable and accessible and usable and secure, obviously. So I can talk a ton about like user sovereignty was something we were really obsessed with there. We kind of went out of our way to make users just not dependent on us, to never be a single point of failure. And we can talk more about some of these things in a bit. But basically the last year and a half or so, I've been at a venture studio called Thesis. We've put out a number of projects over the years, and currently we are incubating and operating Tally Ho, which is a community-owned Web3 wallet, which we'll obviously be talking about a ton today, both what a Web3 wallet is and why Tally Ho is really interesting. But I'll just say, bottom line, community ownership for a wallet for me is kind of like the next logical step after self-custody, right? So you think of like a custodial wallet, and then you have like mixed custody, and then you have a fully self-custodial wallet. And then, okay, what's even more sort of decentralized than that? What puts more power in the hands of users or communities than self-custody? Well, I think it's a self-custody wallet that has community governance, basically. I don't think we've ever seen something like that before. So that's why I was so excited to start working and starting on this at Tally. And so, yeah, currently I'm the project lead. So I'm the main person operating Tally Ho, but we've got a amazing team of, we can talk about it a bit too, but I think that's the skinny on me. That's the TLDR on who I am and why I'm here.
What a great background. It sounds like you've been in the space and building for a long time. Really interesting. I wanted to ask you, when is the crypto dating app coming out? Maybe we could have Jameson Lopp and that Tinder designer work together.
Yeah, we've had some like horrible jokes around like what a Web3 native dating app would be. Gosh, like, yeah, Jameson, I mean, there's some like really funny joke about, like Beard Finder or, choosing your prospective mate based on like what kind of, barrel stock they have buried in their backyard, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think probably the next bull cycle we'll see a crypto dating app. I'm sure it's going to be like real cringe. But I don't know. I mean, isn't that like, we're kind of on like the most popular crypto dating app anyway right now, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The next iteration of OP Radio will be like a blind dating show. But yeah, if anybody's listening wants to build a dating app, let's make it happen. Let's make it happen on Optimism.
Yeah, well, actually, hold on. Let me optimism also. That's like a yeah. You want to have like an optimistic approach to online dating. I mean, one thing you could do is if you guys remember Earn.com, something where you have to. So I think a natural next step for like a crypto dating app, right, would be if you want to send someone a first message, like you actually have to like include like a dust payment or a small amount to for them to open it, right? That's similar like Earn.com before it was acquired by Coinbase. It's basically like you can send people an email and they're like paid to read and respond to it. There might be something like that to reduce just creepy messages that people get. You can do that without crypto, but I don't know, just thought.
Ooh, yeah. There's a lot of stuff you could do there. The wheels are turning. Okay, let's table this for now. Maybe we'll return to it later. So I just want to ask I want to learn more about Tally Ho because a lot of what you said, talking about it harkens back to this kind of the core ethos of Web3. But I just want to start maybe a little bit more basic for maybe people who aren't as familiar with Web3 and just like ask you like, what is a wallet? What is a crypto wallet? What is a Web3 wallet?
Okay, awesome. That's I think a really important question, and I think the answer is like evolving. And I think like what we think of a wallet right now, very different from what it was 5 years ago. It's going to be really different like 5 or 10 years from now. But basically, like a wallet is, like a digital cryptocurrency wallet is something that you use to, receive, store, and like transmit assets historically, right? So like if I have a Bitcoin wallet or an early Ether wallet, a wallet is a place where people can send me tokens. I can keep those safe. And if I want to send those to someone else, I can do that. Web3 wallets are kind of a little bit more than that. They're also the way that you interact with, dApps or basically all of Web3. Also, increasingly, wallets aren't just things that are going to hold like assets or tokens. They also hold NFTs. They also hold different types of permissions. I think there's a pretty good tweet thread from Fred from Paradigm from a couple of years back. Like he had a metaphor of the Web3 wallet basically being like a digital backpack that holds all kinds of stuff. It can hold onto your reputation, your credentials, your assets, your art, things you're a membership from. And your wallet is kind of like the future digital you. So in general, like just to bring it back down to earth a little bit, like your Web3 wallet, it's either going to be something on your phone, it's either going to be in a browser extension, it's going to be something for you to interact with basically Ethereum or Optimism or other blockchains. A lot of that's going to be sending or receiving funds or interacting with different kinds of dApps and Web3 services. I'm biased here because I've worked on wallets for the last like 4 years. I think wallets are by far the most important and the most personal part of the Web3 stack. Like they're your home and they're how you interact with everything else. They're also kind of a choke point for the whole ecosystem. We can talk about that more in a second. But yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I would agree with you that they're super important because your wallet is the way you interact with all this stuff, right? So it's almost like your passport or your gateway into Web3. So I would definitely agree that they're very important. And maybe segueing into where you were headed next, not all wallets are created equal, right? Like there's different approaches to this. So I'm curious what your approach at Tally Ho has been and continues to be.
Totally, totally. So I would say, yeah, like if you think about wallets, there's kind of like a couple things. So it's either the wallet is like custodial, meaning someone else has control, or self-custodial, meaning you have control of your assets. And it's either like open source or it's closed source. And so like, in general, self-custodial and open source wallets are kind of the more Web3 aligned crypto native way to hold your assets. But lots of people use custodial wallets. That's okay, is something to get started with. But yeah, those are like, is it open source or not? Is it self-custodial or not? And I think in the future, we're going to say, okay, is it community owned? Is it community governed or not? Right? I don't think we're having that conversation yet, but I think we will in the future. But okay, so like, what's the deal with Tally Ho? So we haven't shared this publicly yet, but our mission at Tally Ho is we frame it is to enable community-owned access to the decentralized web. So Some of that has to do with your wallet, but it might even go deeper with that. Though obviously we're really focused on the wallet right now, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about. So in terms of like, where we're coming from, why this would started is we feel like there's this secret that no one's wallets are actually decentralized, and we're accessing all of Web3 and we're decentralizing all these things, but we kind of forgot, like, wait a minute, like, what's going on with the wallet? The wallet is our gateway to everything that's Web3 native, but like most wallets aren't Web3 native. They're kind of owned by Web2 style, either growth stage startups or super large, mega corporations, right? So there's something that was like dissonant for us, right? There's something weird about I'm going to have corporate owned, corporate controlled access to the community owned internet. It's kind of a contradiction in terms. I'm gonna access the
Yeah, it kind of
decentralized web.
defeats the purpose, right?
Yeah. It's like, okay, or like, yeah, I'm gonna access to the centralized web through like a completely centralized service, right? And so it's like, okay, we knew there was something wrong here, but to break it down and make it more personal, like there is actual user harm using like a web 2 style wallet, right, with a web 2 style ownership structure. Specifically, like if you are using one of these wallets, and a lot of us do, I still have some non-Tally wallets installed on my computer, mostly for competitive research. Let's be real clear, like you're being tracked and monitored. Your data is going to be shared without your consent to other vendors, possibly also to entities like ICE. We can talk about this later. You do not have a say in how this is going to be governed and what the roadmap is. You don't see any financial upside for value you create. So some of these wallets during the last bear, we're making $1 million a day in fees, not volume, like not swap volume, fees. Users saw none of that. Your access could be cut off to Ethereum or to Web3 pretty much any time. We saw that last year when a few large wallets and also like a couple large NFT places rugged users in Venezuela kind of by accident. And also, like, this kind of goes back to what we're talking about earlier with wallets being like really personal. And I kind of think of them as your home. You're also kind of like estranged in your own home. It's kind of the difference between living in a house where all like the furniture is rented and, you're just doing a long-term Airbnb, or like this is a place that you really like live. Or it's kind of like the difference. I don't know if you guys have been to like co-op grocery. It's the difference between going to like a damn like Ralph's or Amazon owned Whole Foods versus like a community co-op. That's kind of the paradigm that we want to bring into the wallet space. So I mean, that's some of the stuff. I can talk a little bit more about some of the specifics on the corporate wallet stuff, or I can back up Matt because I realize I've just been soliloquizing
No, that
here.
yeah, there's a lot to dig in here. I want to clarify the Airbnb analogy with like not owning it. Can you just extrapolate that or explain that a little more? Are you saying that these megacorps, that's what those wallets are like you're sort of renting it instead of owning it?
Yeah, you're renting it instead of owning it. Someone's like making a bunch of money off of it. And I don't know, like if you're in an Airbnb, like it's cozy, it's nicer than a hotel, right? But
But I
ultimately,
can I
like
can I can say firsthand that they are never furnished in a way that someone would actually want to live there. It's like these hosts, they don't think about, is a person actually going to live here? There's never a sharp knife. There's never a rice cooker. There's never a decently sized mug, right? So yeah, sorry, I'm going down the Airbnb rabbit hole, but yeah, I do see the distinction there.
yeah. I mean, Airbnb, maybe I'm being too dramatic here, but yeah, I mean, I agree. There's never salt. They care that it looks nice, right? Like they care that it photographs well. Oh, that's cool. There's a
Well, look, I
record
think
player. Oh yeah, it doesn't actually work, but like whatever.
yeah, and not to beat this dead horse too much, but you're never going to treat someone else's house as well as you treat your own, right? That's just a fact.
Yes,
And so ownership is
that is true.
important, and community ownership is very important.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so like if I can just go back to like a bit of the prehistory in terms of, I don't know, kind of some of the reasons like why we created the project. So the genesis to this went back to August 2020 when, and not to single them out because this is not just a consensus MetaMask thing at all, when MetaMask moved off the MIT open source license to sort of a tiered proprietary license. That was kind of the initial trigger for, wait a minute. That was like an internal wake up call for a lot of us. Like, oh yeah.
Can you
There's
explain
something
what
missing here.
what does a tiered proprietary license mean?
That is a great question. So there's a whole blog post going back to August 2020 where they explain this, but basically it says, look, if you want to use MetaMask code for your own project, if you have like if a really small number of users, I think it's something like under 5,000 users, don't quote me on that, but under a certain threshold of users, that's okay. But if you're going to have more people using your product that you're using MetaMask code for, we need to have a conversation about, basically MetaMask being compensated in some ways. And there are other sort of restrictions.
Okay, so they get you on the free trial and then upsell you later.
A little bit, yeah. It's sort of like a growth plan for like a SaaS firm, right? So it's like, okay, we get a couple seats, we get up to, X number of API credits. That's kind of the growth plan or the intro plan. Maybe it's free, maybe it's $49. But then if you're actually starting to use it at scale, if your business is starting to do well, then yeah, it's a different situation. You're going to be, that's when they would start making the bucks. So I totally understand why they did it. I think it's kind of an open secret. I think it's sort of open knowledge. Brave used a lot of MetaMask code to create the Brave wallet that's baked into their browser extension. And again, I understand why the team at Consensus did that. I think it totally makes sense. But it's also like, you're no longer open source. And like you've had people, Gitcoin grants going back years. You've had open source contributors contributing code for years to this project, and suddenly the licenses changed. We realized, okay, there's something kind of like out of alignment here, and there's room for a project that's kind of like governed and operated differently, that maps a lot more tightly to some ideals and aspirations of like a community-owned internet in general. And that was sort of like the genesis of Tally Ho. We were also really concerned that wallets were going to start blocking users in different countries. And obviously that ended up happening. I think it was in March of last year. So it's just about a year ago. I think it was Infura and OpenSea and a few other larger Web3 projects basically blocked users, I believe in like Iran, Cuba, North Korea, Syria, parts of Ukraine and Russia, but then accidentally blocked everyone in Venezuela. That was rolled back. And so again, the issue wasn't a particular firm. It was really unfortunate because Venezuelans are probably like some of the people that could most benefit from, that are probably like some of the most economically vulnerable folks in the world. And it's just, so the issue here wasn't just that this one thing happened, it's the fact that like it could happen, right? And like, okay, what kind of like choke point have we created in the ecosystem? Yeah. So that was another thing that really concerned us. We thought this might happen as far back as like 2020, and obviously it ended up happening in 2022. I don't need to go into some of like the recent like IP tracking stuff that came up in November. And then there was also something that really caught our eye back in June of 2022 about Coinbase. And again, this Coinbase is not a self-custodial service, so they do have Coinbase Wallet. About Coinbase basically giving a bunch of geodata to ICE, which is effectively like a deportation authority here in the US. So we have examples from Infura or MetaMask or other wallets, and then also Coinbase around surveillance, IP tracking, users being basically rugged and prevented from accessing Web3 altogether.
Oh, I just wanted to interject quickly. Yeah, because we don't want to single anybody out. Obviously, this is a problem that has occurred across multiple projects, and what it really underlines is the importance of decentralization, right? Because this is a failure of centralization. Because when you have these single points of failure that can be leaned on, they might censor people, as we've seen.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to be super clear, and thanks for calling that. I don't think this is a problem with any one provider. This is going to be a provider. This is going to be an issue with any one or any couple of providers that reach a certain scale and that are, governed by like a more traditional corporate structure, right?
Cool. Okay, so to kind of bring this back and bring the conversation sort of back to Tally Ho, it sounds like this is all stuff that you guys care deeply about and are thinking deeply about, and so have designed this wallet to prevent or circumnavigate some of these issues.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly right. So Tally Ho, the idea is we basically want to enable community-owned access to Web3 or be like the go-to community-owned portal to Web3. Right now, that means wallet. It could even mean something else in the future. Is our definition of what a wallet is. Maybe it evolves in the future, just like it's evolved from maybe 10 years ago to something that you use to send and receive assets to today, it's something that you primarily use to interact with everything else. And in the future, it could even be broader than that. So Tally-Ho, there's kind of three like key principles that I would say we are worth calling out. One is access for everyone. So everyone should have direct access to Web3, no matter where you live, what kind of passport you have, race, gender, etc. Full transparency. So all code should be 100% open source for anyone to copy, fork, remix, whatever it is. And then full community ownership. So value should flow kind of transparently to the community, not sort of be concentrated up at the top. And so I would say all of these we see as sort of a mountain without a top, right? Like you can always find ways to be more transparent, to extend more access, to extend more value to the community. So we put these values out not in the sense of like, okay, this is something we fully accomplished now, but in the sense of like, this is where we're going, this is what we believe, this is what we want to be held accountable to. So access for everyone, I would say right now, Tally-Ho is not yet fully sort of censorship resistant. We rotate to a bunch of different RPC providers instead of just one. So currently you have a little bit more protection than with other wallets, but there's a lot more that we can do around this. And we'll be sharing some pretty exciting stuff over the coming months about our plans to make ideally sort of provide people with like an unruggable, you could say, or as unruggable as possible / compliant, and over the coming months. From the transparency perspective, so we use what's called like a copyleft license, which basically means we're 100% open source. All code will be owned by the upcoming DAO. And it's, without getting too into the weeds, it's basically impossible for us to change that software license at any point in the future. We chose this really aggressive open source license. That's GPL v3, basically so that our hands would be tied and it would be kind of open source for good. And then full community ownership. Can't say too much about this, but obviously there is going to be a means for people to own the wallet. And we've got some ideas floating around on our forum for what this would look like. But yeah, the idea is that the vast majority of like the wallet should be owned by its users. That is important for a couple of reasons, but most notably is like the users have control over it. And then also, again, going back to our Airbnb example, it's not, they're not just users, they're user owners, right? And you have a different relationship to something that you co-own. So I'll kind of leave it at that. I guess actually
100%.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, I'm picking up some common themes here with some of the things that we think about a lot at Optimism. Those things being modularity, redundancy, and a commitment to open source. So I see a lot of parallels and a lot of alignment with what we're doing at Optimism, and it sounds like the ethos at Tally-Ho. Okay, so we could take this a few ways. We've got if this wasn't already spicy enough, we've got kind of a spicy thing on privacy in here. I would love to hear your take on privacy in Web3, Michael. It seems like, I kind of want to ask, do people care anymore? Do people care about privacy? I certainly do, but it's become very hard to, if that is a value you have, if it's something you care about, it's just quite inconvenient to be private in Web3 at this point. Do you see a solution? Do you see a future where that's not the case?
Yeah, I think it's really tough. I think it's really inconvenient generally. I think it's hard in Web3 because I don't know, there's social norms that are not really about privacy, right? Like, okay, we, have like anon accounts and people maybe are using PFPs instead of their own photo, but people are also kind of like doxing themselves. Like they'll have an ENS account or they'll have an ENS name with like a lot of assets associated with it. And so, there's something like, there's something a bit funny about like the state of privacy in crypto or Web3 now. Like if you go back to like OG, like even like pre-Bitcoin cypherpunk times, decentralization was a goal, but also like like privacy was a goal, right? And Bitcoin shipped, obviously, with the total opposite of privacy. Okay, yeah, it's pseudonymous accounts.
Yeah, it's a public
not
ledger, public blockchain.
So, and what's funny is then you had this coming out of that, like ultimately, like if they could have pulled off Zcash back in like 2009 to 2011, like we'd probably have a different, like that's probably what would have shipped instead of Bitcoin. Maybe that's a spicy take, but I think like that's almost clearly what would have happened. And this whole ethos around transparency and everything being available and visible all the time, we might be living in like a very different ecosystem. It's also possible the ecosystem would have been like squashed earlier by regulators. I was talking to Stani this summer, and he had a really interesting point that like if DeFi initially was all completely opaque and behind, and it was like ZK DeFi, then it might have just been like squashed by regulators initially. And like part of the reason that DeFi is so popular is it's like fully transparent, right? So anyway, I'm saying a couple things here, but ultimately like this sort of full transparency, global availability of all data ethos, that's actually one of the things I love about the space. In some ways might have been like a happy accident. And two, I don't know, I think people have sort of like personalized that, right? So it's like, I want to be transparent about all the different things that I have. And, we're kind of like walking in two directions here. One is we want, most people in the space are really against surveillance capitalism. I certainly am. That's one of the reasons I'm in this space. But then also like, we really want to advertise like our, sort of like tribal or community affiliations. And I think it's fine because it's okay right now, but there could be a point soon where there's going to be a lot of like the energy and intelligence in the like internet ad economy, I think is going to start migrating over to Web3. And suddenly we're going to find we're being like retargeted based on like the POAPs in our wallet, right? And we might not like that. I can say a bunch more, but ultimately, I think what concerns me is that, at least with like the ad economy, your data is, for better and worse, it's like, Google and Facebook have pretty good cybersecurity, and so all this information about you is at least behind closed doors. In Web3, it's all out in the open. You can think of POAPs kind of as like opt-in cookies or something, and so I don't know, like where does this leave us from a privacy perspective? I guess what
Yeah,
I
and
would
so,
be
I mean, I
concerned
guess
about
you
is,
could make the
yeah,
argument that by having this stuff out in the open from the get-go, it almost makes it less valuable. Or, if you're operating under the assumption that everything's public, then, you're going to move a certain way, and that in itself is a sort of protection. But I don't know. I don't have the answers. I think it's a fascinating conversation. I think at the very least, I think it would be nice to have the option, right, to have a private transaction. It is a totally different paradigm shift to have everything 100% open and public and transparent.
yeah. I mean, also just a bit more like context. I made like a loving quip about my former CTO Jameson Lop's beard earlier. So just for more context on where I'm kind of coming at this from is, so Jameson in 2018, basically because of like a Twitter flame war, was like basically doxxed and swatted. So personal information about him, his home address, it's leaked online, and then kind of as a practical joke, basically someone we don't know who, I've never been able to find him, basically called into the local police where Jameson lived and pretended to be someone like basically holding Jameson's family hostage. So the police protocol for stuff like this is basically to just send in a SWAT team. And anyway, this is basically what swatting is for folks that aren't familiar with it. And obviously it's like a really horrible joke, and this is something that happens in kind of gamer culture sometimes. But people, like every year a couple of people die from stuff like this. So Jameson came back one day, like coming back from the gym, and there was a police perimeter around his house, and he's like, "Well, what's going on here?" And they're like, "Oh, there's a hostage situation." And he finds out it's from his home and his family's there. And so he's like, whoa, wait, hold on. So he calls his family, and everyone realizes, okay, this was a practical joke, but I mean, something really awful could have happened. So after this, Jameson went through this like 6-month journey of, you know, owning his house through an LLC, setting up the craziest VPN on his router that you can imagine, purchasing decoy properties, hiring like private investigators to go and like chase him and his family down to make sure that they'd gotten rid of their paper trail. He canceled his credit. So there's something called a modest privacy proposal. If you guys Google it, if you're interested to learn more about what he did here. And it was almost like he was doing this partially for his protection, but also just as an exercise to see if you actually want to stay private, if you actually want to stay private, like what links do you have to go to? And it's like $20,000 a year, basically, if you really, really want to do it to the standard that Jameson did.
Which makes it just simply out of the reach of a lot of most people, I would say, right?
I mean, it's nuts. I mean, there's a few things people can do to stay, like, you know, for privacy and, you know, privacy, personal security 101, you know, use a VPN, use a password manager with a YubiKey, set up like
not LastPass though. Don't use LastPass.
Don't use LastPass. Not right now, anyway. Yeah, and then, you know, use like Google Voice for your phone number. Basically, if you put your phone number online anywhere, like people can basically figure out. Anyone who's smart can kind of figure out a lot of information about you just from your phone number. So you really want to give that out as little as possible. And I think in general, beyond that, just give as little data ever as possible. You should imagine that like anything that you share online can and will be shared all over the place, or will borderline be like accessible. So imagine like anytime you fill out a form, that's like that's like basically an on-chain action. It's true for a couple of reasons. One, people are sharing data with everyone, and then two, people get hacked. So if anyone hasn't been to haveibeenpwned.com, just enter your email address and see like how many times your password might have been leaked and sold on the dark web in clear text. So anyway, those are a couple things you can do to just protect your privacy. But anyway, that's the context I'm coming from with Jameson. It's basically that if you're like, it's basically like we collected as little data as possible. We ran no analytics as the extension. A lot of our clients were pseudonymous. And the operating assumption was that basically any personal data that they leaked that could be linked to their location and their amount of Bitcoin was like a direct, you know, it put them in harm's way personally, right? So, you know, I was really interested in working on projects in Ethereum, like right around the time of launch through 2018. And then 2018 to 2021 was pretty much just focused on Bitcoin and Lightning. Came back, and it's really taken me like a year to get used to how different the privacy norms are from what I was working on, where it was everyone was pseudonymous, no one wanted to share any information at all, to okay, we're putting seed phrases in 1Password or LastPass, and everyone's have a public profile showing, you know, that they have, you know, a net worth of at least, you know, $50,000. So I don't know. It's
it absolutely. Like it is very interesting that what sort of where we've ended up. And yeah, like you, I do remember that privacy was an important value in the beginning of crypto, and it seems to have sort of fallen by the wayside. And I'm just curious if it's going to make a resurgence. And basically, you know, I think people will follow the path of least resistance, at least most, you know, average users, people who aren't your Jameson Lops of the world, right? They're just going to use basically the products and services that are the easiest to use, that are the most widely available. And so it's kind of on those projects to have these things baked in from the get-go. I'm going to go to haveibeenpwned.com after this. I'm a little bit terrified to see what I'm going to find, but I do think it's important for people to go into these things with their eyes wide open, right? At the very least. So, you know, a problem is one thing, but having a problem and not knowing you have a problem is even worse. So I at least hope that people, that's why I think this is an important conversation. I think it's important for people to at least understand that their data is out there.
Yeah, and I guess if there's one privacy thought I would sprinkle, is that the sort of our transparency culture value in Web3 is like beautiful. It's one of my favorite things about the space. Keep an eye out for how the surveillance economy is going to kind of creep back in and maybe take advantage of that. I think we're going to see another wave of startups and maybe not, maybe even bigger firms come in and sort of start correlating on-chain activity and with the traditional, sort of stores of like Web2 user data. So sort of
Which
like
just puts us right back where we started, right? Which was kind of missing the point of this, of these companies owning our data and selling it and profiting from it, and the opposite of user empowerment.
Yeah, it's going to be like if you get a, if this is actually an interesting thing for people to do. If you're shopping, if you're looking for a flight on like Kayak, some of the offers you'll get are going to be less competitive, or at least this might have changed. But if you're on a Mac versus a PC, because advertisers know people who use Mac, generally it's a more expensive computer. They might have a little bit more money, so they can highball them a bit. It could be something similar to this where, you're getting, your retargeting ad for a bicycle helmet or something, and people know, okay, yeah, this user profile, yeah, they might, they've got, 50K and, OP tokens, and they have a bunch of these, Optipunks. So, we can, they're going to be able to use that data. It's like, so we're kind of at risk of giving over more data. But yeah, I think Mac, you said it best.
This is a super interesting conversation. I think most or wallets, I think users don't quite understand that the power that wallets hold in terms of Web3 privacy. And maybe a lot of that is that wallets straddle the world between Web2 and Web3, right? And actually, I just had a company that's been reaching out to us. I won't call them out, but they're trying to do data attribution between Web2 data and Web3 on-chain data, and basically connecting that user between Web2 and Web3. So it's, this is a space that we're starting to get into, and I'm glad that Tally Ho, you guys are thinking about this thoughtfully. And I don't think there's a silver bullet. We're all trying to figure this out, but I think talking about this and making users aware that this is something that's happening is one of the first steps, right?
100%. Yeah, I don't think anybody on this call has or would claim to have the answers, but at the very least, we're thinking about this stuff. And I think these conversations are very important as well. Okay, switching gears a bit here, Michael. I always like to ask projects about their thinking behind moving to layer 2 and, specifically about moving to Optimism. So I'm curious about the thinking there from Tally Ho's perspective.
Totally. So we're big fans of the like L2 movement in general, and like I and a lot of other members on the team have kind of like a soft spot for optimism, which we can talk about. But in general, for I think at least as far back as like 2016, I've thought that Ethereum's place should be as kind of like a global state settlement layer, and you should have all sorts of different systems kind of like hooking into it. Some traditional blockchain systems, and maybe some that we haven't even thought of yet. And so it's awesome to see projects. I don't know. It's awesome to see Ethereum become more of like a broader ecosystem, and I don't know. I think it's great. I think you also have like these different subcultures for each chain or for each L2, and I don't know. I mean, the obvious things around like affordability are really big. So I don't know, kind of a scattered thought, but I think that part of the reason that we've been so excited on L2s in general is we feel, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this, we feel like they're very underserved by wallets. So the whole idea with, I mean, one of the main ideas around layer 2s, and I know Optimism in particular, is like, can we is like making crypto, making Web3 more like financially accessible, right? Prices are down now, but it used to be that if I wanted to swap on L1, it was like, what, $40 the height? It would just get crazy. So how can we make this financially accessible? So accessibility, a real value, one we totally share, but the user experience is often not really accessible, right? So some wallets you have to, if you want to use Optimism, maybe you need to, install a custom network. Really complicated. Like probably we're losing 90% of possible users right there. Number two, like bridging. Okay, well, I've added the network. Now I have to bridge. Bridging is probably the most terrifying user journey anyone can go on, right? I think the OP official bridge is pretty friendly, but still, you're throwing money into a black hole and you don't know what's coming out, right? And then three, as I think there's also just like a lack of like straight to L2 onboarding, right? If I want to like go into MoonPay or just fund my wallet straight onto OP instead of having to put it onto L1 and then send it to OP. That's a whole ordeal. So I think there are three actually pretty easy to solve, I don't know, UX, three horsemen of the, L2 apocalypse or whatever. It's having to add custom networks. It's generally bridging is real scary. And then number three, it's, the lack of onboarding. Optimism is like one of our preferred networks. It was the first L2 that we added, and you don't need to add a custom network for it. You just click on the top of hit Optimism, you're good to go. I am interested in adding some. Well, anyway, I feel like I'm getting too down the rabbit hole on all the UX things we're trying to improve. But basically, these are things that we're targeting. If there are other pain points that folks have around, that we think could like unblock more adoption of Optimism or L2s in general, I'd love to hear it. But TLDR, I mean, we're excited because I think it's making Ethereum more accessible. Like there's more room for experimentation. There are more opportunities for people to like find their subculture. Obviously, Optimism and Arbitrum are very different. I think they're both great. And I think it's great to have those different spaces for people to go into. And yeah, I don't know. I'll kind of leave it at that. It's also just exciting for someone who's been in this space to see like this vision start to come together. It's been a long time coming. And, well, I think, you guys are kind of like the leading L2s along with, maybe Arbitrum also. And it's far bigger than a lot of, L1s already. So I don't know. I think kind of like the sky's the limit for where this goes.
Yeah, I really agree with you about the UX, Michael. I mean, it's got a lot, and I want to hear from Vivian on this as well, but it definitely has a lot of room for improvement. And if wallets are sort of your gateway to the Web3 world, they just need to be super simple. They need to be as simple as possible if we're going to get that next level of adoption. So I couldn't agree with you more there. Vivian, do you have anything to add on that point?
Yeah, I think, Michael, like to your point, 100% the L2s have really been underserved by wallets. And there's a couple of wallets that are like, L2 kind of EVM wallets, but everybody's in early stages, and wallets in general, I think, are in early stages. But solving for that onboarding and that whole onboarding experience, I think, is like really what we need to work towards fixing a little bit. Like if we think about, I think the anecdotal story is like everybody talks about like, oh, I try to introduce my grandmother to crypto, and like it took her like 30 steps to get, a token to do something, right? So this is like something that we're really focused on Optimism, that I've been focusing on like working with wallets to improve that onboarding experience from not just like fiat on ramp, but like account abstraction, getting rid of seed phrases. Like what are the things like specifically that really excite you guys at Tally Ho and like you think will solve that onboarding problem?
Yeah, I mean, some of it I think is just literally as simple as like, hey, you're using Optimism for the first time. Do you want to like get some OP, and like having people be able to purchase and deposit straight to Optimism instead of like move to L1 and then bridge or transfer to OP. I think like big picture, there's a couple things that we're thinking about with usability. One is definitely account abstraction. I don't know if it's going to be totally baked by this year, but I think like at some point in 2024, we're going to be moving to a place where seed phrases are becoming hopefully a little bit of like a UX relic. People coming into the space now are just less tolerant of this. And it's so anyway, I don't know if we're going to totally destroy seed phrases forever this year, but I think in 2024, it seems like across most smart contract chains, seed phrases will hopefully be a thing of the past. So account abstraction is really interesting. I would also say this is a term that we've tossed around internally, just chain abstraction in general. Like we are moving to a more and more kind of, polychain world, not in terms of the VC firm, but in terms of a world of many, many, many chains. And I think ultimately what matters we think, is kind of accounts rather than networks. And we also think so like, for instance, if I go to, so like the way that like the core UX paradigm works right now in terms of like going to adapt, clicking connect wallet, switching networks, and then you go to a different tab and then you connect to a different network and then you go back to the other tab and then the network switch. This paradigm kind of doesn't make sense for like a multi-chain world, which is where we all agree where we're going. So we want to get to a point probably where you can just connect, or maybe your browser even connects by default, and you're kind of connected to all chains at once simultaneously. And a lot of these details around switching between networks and, wait, it's this network on this tab, these details really need to like go into the background. So long story short, I'd say account abstraction, we're psyched about like focusing on accounts rather than networks. That's another paradigm that we're focused on. I think long term, just the current slog of connecting your wallet to a DApp and switching networks, that's something we'd really like to see changed also, but it's kind of an ecosystem wide challenge. That's not something that like we can do in and of ourselves. But yeah, those are a couple things. I'd say chain abstraction, in addition to account abstraction, are some of the like UX things we're most excited about.
Looking forward to see what you guys come up with. We're getting close to time here, so I want to start wrapping it up. But Michael, you mentioned, you get your wallet and you start using Optimism, and maybe you collect some OP. Speaking of which, I believe there might be some incentives, some OP incentives for Tally Ho users. Can you let people know information about that?
Yes. So we are the very grateful recipients of a grant from the Optimism Squad, and we're going to use it in 4 different ways. One is, and basically, like, it's all for growth incentives to expand Optimism first and foremost, and also to hopefully help make Tally Ho the best dang Optimism wallet you can ask for. So we're actually banging out exactly what this is going to look like with the OP community, including obviously Vivian. We've been talking about this a bunch, but just as like a little alpha leak, expect at some point this year, hopefully sooner rather than later, if you are going to use your Tally Ho wallet to swap tokens on Optimism through the in-wallet swap feature, you might get some cool rewards for that. If you are bridging pretty much any asset from any non-Optimism chain to Optimism, there might be some interesting rewards for that. And there are also going to probably just be some like really fun campaigns to, I don't know, just get more TVL, more activity, more transactions on Optimism. There's a lot of different ways this could go. But yeah, basically, like, if you guys are just using Optimism, like with Tally, there should be some rewards for that. And so that's something that we're working on, and we're hoping it can like kind of grow the pie for everyone. It's a great
Awesome. Yeah, so everybody can look forward to that, and I would imagine just follow Tally Ho official on Twitter to stay up to date on that stuff, as well as Optimism, of course. That's Tally Ho HO official on Twitter. And before we close this out, Mike, there was one other place I think you might want to direct people to, this Web3 pledge. Can you tell people what that is?
Shortly after, like basically in August last year, we'd been head down in build mode, and we felt like it was time to come up and kind of let the community know, like, okay, what are our values? What are we building? Why is community ownership for wallet important? So we put out this Web3 pledge that basically talks about some of the risks with centrally controlled wallets that I talked about earlier on this call, and then says a little bit about what our values are, what we're building. It's pretty quick read. You can go to just tallyho.org/Web3 pledge, or you can find it pretty easily online. But if you're looking at that, if you agree with the values, if you just want to try out the wallet, give it a read, give it a sign. There's a pretty simple flow for it. But yeah, it honestly kind of took off in a way we weren't expecting. I was hoping, we'd 10,000 signatures. We have about 200,000 signatures to date so far, which is pretty awesome. And we have pretty decent Sybil checks on that also. So yeah, I would say if you guys want to understand more about what we're about, what we care about, what our values are, what we're building, I'd say just go to our website, check out the pledge. If you're feeling so inclined, give it a sign and, join the community. We're pretty transparent in terms of like what we're building, when and why. And so if you guys have ideas for how we can make a better wallet for Optimism, or just generally things you'd love to see in a wallet, jump in our Discord, let us know in feature requests. I'm findable on Twitter. My DMs are open. So just keep me posted. I think that's pretty much it. The one thing, as a data point, I did forget to share that I think is worthwhile. We are, as far as I know, in terms of user-based activity, like the most L2-centric wallet currently. If you look at other wallets, they're maybe 70 to 90% L1, either Binance or Ethereum. Right now, I think about 95% of our swaps volume is either Optimism or Arbitrum. So I don't know if you want to kind of
Wow,
carve out
that's
a home
fascinating.
install. Yeah, it's kind of nuts.
Awesome. Okay, Vivian, did you have anything else to add before we close this out?
No, I think that was great. I think the main message is get yourself a Tally Ho wallet, look out for some cool campaigns that are going to happen, and then maybe take your OP and participate in OP governance. Is that, and community driven project from one community driven project to another.
100%. I love that. Well, Michael, this has been absolutely fascinating. I think we're going to have you on again, OP Radio, sometime in 2023. But thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Vivian, for joining us as well. Thanks to all the listeners. Hope you have a great rest of your day. See you on the internet. Stay optimistic, y'all. Bye.
Thank y'all. Cheers.